talking about physical destruction. Specifically, within that broader category, in the name of jihad. Jihad is a term I trust you have had some exposure to. We're not allowed to talk about it in Washington, mind you, so if you know anything about it, it is despite the policies of the United States government. You may be familiar with the term terrorism. We're not allowed to talk about that anymore either. That's the previous administration's euphemism for jihad. We're now on to our 2.0 euphemism to describe this phenomenon of jihad. It's now described as countering violent, or excuse me, just plain violent violent extremism. And what we're in the business of doing is countering violent extremism. By violent extremism, of course, we're talking about people who actually have been imbued with something known as Shariah. Shariah being, again, a term maybe you're familiar with, maybe you're not. We're not allowed to talk about it either, especially the FBI and the Homeland Security Department and the national security agencies of the United States government, including the military. Indeed, your career can be ruined if you actually talk about any of these things. You may be familiar with the recent example of a lieutenant colonel by the name of Matt Dooley. Matt Dooley was singled out by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff by name in a recent press event for the purpose of excoriating Matt Dooley because he was in a most insensitive way training people at the Armed Forces Staff College that people engage in violent extremism because they actually believe that God is directing them to do it pursuant to Sharia in the form of jihad. Now, I'm sure you appreciate that that is offensive. Most especially, it is offensive to jihadis who do not like having our military personnel, or our Homeland Security personnel, or our FBI personnel, or our intelligence personnel understand why they're doing what they're doing. And what I really wanted to visit with you about, in a little bit of detail tonight, on the way to talking about the immigration piece of this, is not so much the violent jihad or extremism as the stealth jihad, the civilization jihad, as its prime practitioners, a group that's getting a little bit of press these days, at long last, the Muslim Brotherhood calls it. How do we know they call it that? Well, and this is one of my most favorite fun facts to know and tell, so I share it with you in the hopes that you will do the same. We know that they call it civilization jihad because in 2004, down in Mark and my neck of the woods, an alert Maryland Transportation Authority police officer who was charged with keeping an eye on a major artery known as the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Anybody know that marvelous span? Well, he was on duty and he was watching the traffic, and he happened to observe that a couple was doing something that a lot of couples do, or drivers going across the bridge. You get up to the top of this span, and you're looking out at this magnificent landscape, seascape, whatever you want to call it. Well, they whip out a camera and they take pictures of it. Only this particular couple, the officer noticed, were taking pictures of the structural supports of the bridge. It occurred to him that was not a good thing. The fact that the woman happened to be wearing a hijab might have had something to do with him thinking that was not a good thing, but maybe not. That would be profiling, after all. We don't do that, do we? the police officer pulled them over, and he ran their IDs, and he discovered that the driver of the car was a gentleman by the name of Ismail El-Barassa, who, upon closer inspection, was wanted on a material witness arrest warrant out of Chicago in connection with fundraising for an organization you may also have heard of, Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. Well, that produced a search warrant on their home in another community not far from where Mark and I operate, Annandale, Virginia, about 20 minutes, if the traffic isn't too bad, from the nation's capital. When they went top to bottom, the FBI discovered, actually below the bottom, a secret sub-basement in which were 80 banker boxes worth of documents that actually made up the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood in America. We know some of the fruits of this unbelievably providential find because they were introduced into evidence in the Holy Land Foundation trial, the largest terrorism financing trial in U.S. history, conducted down in Dallas, Texas, ultimately successfully in 2008. And coming back to my point, one of the documents that was introduced helpfully into evidence was something called the explanatory memorandum of the strategic goal of the group. An inelegant way of saying the strategic plan of the Muslim Brotherhood in America. This document had, among other interesting elements, a mission statement, which went like this. The mission of the group in America is, quote, a kind of grand jihad in destroying and eliminating Western civilization from within, destroying its miserable house by their hands and the hands of the believers, so that God's religion is made victorious over all other religions, unquote.